So with me today is Cassandra Shore, a world-renowned master of Middle Eastern dance in all its forms, from the American cabaret nightclub to formal and historic, folkloric, and traditional dances of all throughout the Middle East. She's based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and she was willing to spend some time with us this morning talking about her dance journey, which is quite fascinating and in a way tells the story of this dance form in the United States in recent decades. Cassandra, you began studying Middle Eastern dance after seeing performers in Chicago in the 70s. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And
thank you for being with us.
A master of all, because of course I'm still learning. There's so much when you start digging into it. I actually started taking classes in Minnesota when I was at the University of Minnesota from a woman who was teaching at the community ed through the University of Minnesota. And I was already in dance class. That was like one of my favorite things to do while I was studying pre-med. And because of her, I went to a workshop in Chicago and saw some nightclub performers, and quite frankly fell in love with it at that moment when I saw how musical the dance was. And after that, I decided I would move to a community where there was an active retired professional teaching, and so I moved to San Francisco.
And who did you study with there?
When I first arrived, well, actually before I arrived, I had heard of Jamila Salimpour because one of her protege at the time was Aida Al-Adawi, and Aida was sent to teach in Chicago instead of Jamila. Jamila didn't like to fly, she took the train. And I called Jamila to find out when her classes started in the fall, because, you know, coming from Minnesota and the university, we had classes and sessions, et cetera, and semesters. And I said, can you tell me when your classes begin in the fall? And Jamila says, excuse me, but when is the fall? Because of course, right? Because of course, you know, we have very distinctive seasons here, right? In Minnesota. So I actually just loaded up a car, one of these drive-away cars with my clothes and my records and my dog, and drove out to California and stayed with some friends for a little while in the East Bay, and eventually moved into the city. And the first thing I did is go out to the clubs where there was live music and dance and watch the dancers there, because I had been performing a little bit in Minnesota. And, you know, watching the quality of the dancers, I realized that there's no chance that I was going to be dancing there anytime soon. So I started studying like 5 or 6 days a week with anyone I could find at that time. So I was in Mill Valley with a woman named Stasha, and with Jamila and Aida and the people that were teaching at Jamila's studio. And eventually I auditioned at a place called the Powell Station on Powell Street that did not have live music. It had recorded music and 5 dancers a night. We all did 4 or 5 shows, depending on what number in the show order you were. And I started working there. I only had 2 costumes, so that was kind of a mess when you're doing 5 shows. It's better to have a few more costumes than that. They get a little stinky.
Wow.
And from there, as I got better and better, I eventually auditioned at the live music places and was hired there. And then I was doing 3 shows a night. The 5 shows a night were only 15 to 20 minutes, usually about 20 minutes long. But the 3 shows a night were anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes long. So that was quite an experience, but I was working with live music. And since I was the new girl in the club at the time, I was dancing at the Casbah, I would go on first, because there were usually no one was in the club that first show, which started at about 9 o'clock. And the musicians would practice new music, and they would practice music and sing new songs for me and tell me what the rhythms were. And, you know, they were very, very helpful. If they saw you were serious, they were very, very helpful. And that's actually how I started playing percussion, because they would ask me to come up on stage and show me how to play the rick or the tabla. And I would play behind some of the other dancers as they were performing.
Wow, that is wonderful. So it was the Casbah where you first were able to deal with this level of a high level of, club ensemble. Were you dancing to, was it Greek, Armenian, Arabic, Turkish all meshed together, or what sort of stuff would they play?
No, I think the Greek, Armenian, Turkish, Arabic mix was more East Coast. The West Coast, it was a little more separated. So if you worked at a Greek club, you danced with the Greek musicians, and they played kind of a combination of, some famous Arabic songs, of course, they all know Aziza, and some Turkish music and Greek music. And when you were working at a place called the Casbah or the Baghdad, you were working with Arabic music. And sometimes there would be, depending on the musicians, at the Casbah, Jalaluddin and his brother Salah worked there, and they were Azerbaijani, so occasionally we'd have a little bit of Azerbaijani or Turkish music mixed in, but generally speaking it was Arabic music, the live music was. And by the time I left San Francisco, I think I was working 6 nights a week, 3 of them in the live music club, and maybe 3 of them, well, actually 4 of them in the live music clubs and 2 of them back at the Powell Station with the recorded music.
Would you say you left, you came back in like 1978, right, to Minnesota? Is that
1977. I went to San Francisco in 1975. I came back in 1977. It was about 2 years or so. And I came back, and the dancer who was working at the Greek nightclub that was here wanted to take off a little bit early. It was right around the 4th of July, and she wanted to be gone by the 4th of July. So she asked me to come and take her job for a few weeks. And actually I came and was at that job for 2.5 years before they gave me a break. 5 nights, it was 5 nights a week, 2 shows a night at that time, and those shows were half an hour long. So I was 5 nights a week, and then I would teach on my nights off. And as I recall, you came to my classes in the basement of that nightclub where I was performing at that time.
Oh yes, that's exactly right. I remember going to, the name was George's in Fridley with my new husband. We were just married, and seeing you perform, and I went right backstage and said, are you teaching? So I immediately signed up. I was so happy to find you as a teacher. But this is, you obviously came back to Minneapolis with your head filled with Arabic music and all these performance skills. It was like you were in belly dance boot camp out there in California.
Absolutely.
I can't even imagine being out there and dancing, for an hour and a half or hour and 15 minutes. So if you're with these Arabic bands, and they're obviously you have breaks, right? You've just got a break where somebody does a long improvisation, or you're not dancing the whole time, or were you?
Oh no, you are dancing the whole time. I mean, the format of the shows in those days would be, a song for your entrance. A lot of the bands in San Francisco did not play what we now refer to as emergencies, those instrumental openings. They maybe knew one. Those were a little more prevalent in Los Angeles, but not so much in San Francisco. So we would have songs, and they would open with a song, and then they would play a long improvisation during which you would do your veil work, and then they would do another song, and then they would play a long improvisation in which you would do floor work, and then you would get up and they would play a song, and then you would go for tips, and then you would come back and you would do a drum solo, and then they would do a finale, and that was your show. And that was pretty much the shows at the live Arabic music places and at the live Greek places as well. And they were just either shorter or longer, or if you were dancing to Greek music, like 3 times as fast.
Oh my gosh, that's really, really incredible.
So you were dancing for an hour and 15 minutes. I mean, if there wasn't anybody in the club, you were learning music or they were teaching you something, but you were dancing because you had to dance in case someone came in. You couldn't just be standing around. There was no time that we stood around on stage. Our breaks were when the other dancers were performing.
Wow. And would you tend to sit and watch just to learn, or would you hang out backstage?
Yes, you would always, I would always sit and watch. I did learn something really valuable early on that I still tell people today, and that is that you should only watch the good dancers, because you will inadvertently pick up habits from bad dancers without really realizing it. So only watch the good dancers, ladies.
Very excellent advice. Oh, that's so funny. Cassandra, when you say you're talking about your earliest teachers like Aida and Stasha, was it? And of course Jamila. Who would you say, could you even say who had the greatest influence on your early technique, or was it all of them? And if you can talk about, you have a really strong technique that you've now shared with thousands of dancers over the years, but who do you look to when you think of who gave you your greatest inspiration in terms of technique over the years?
Well, I would say that I started with Jamila and that I was very impressed with her technique when I first saw her dancers perform. And my thought, the reason I went there is my thought was, if the students are good, the teacher must be even better. I should go there and study. It's like her technique is really clean. And so she was a big influence on me, but I have to say that when I discovered Ratya Hassan in Cairo, she has probably had the biggest influence on me. I mean, aside from the dancers from the old videos that I saw, Soher Zaki, I spent a long time trying to figure out, like how those dancers were, the technique that the dancers were using, which was quite different from the technique that American dancers were learning at the time. Soher Zaki, Fifi Abdu, Hanan, Aziz Sharif, Nahid Sabri, Shadia, those people on video early in the 80s were very influential to me. And then when I discovered Ratya, she was also very influential to me in my technique. I learned really a lot from her about it's a different way of holding your weight and using your weight. And that was not really taught in the States at that time.
Very, very, very interesting. So you've kind of given me this segue to the 1980s when you started traveling to Cairo and Egypt and Turkey to watch performers and study with local teachers. Can you share one or two memorable moments during those trips, kind of things that opened your eyes in new ways? Because I think, it's wonderful. Many dancers are now going and traveling with, Sahra Saida's Journey to Egypt program, and they're getting exposed in deep ways that they wouldn't have before. But I think everyone has their own epiphanies, and I'm just wondering, just if you can remember a couple of moments that were important to you on your travels.
Well, first of all, I was there before Sahara City closed. And so I was at Sahara City, which was, the tent cabaret variety show just next to the pyramids. And I was there twice before they closed. So I got to see the Sumbadi Gwazi balance the tables and chairs in their teeth and balance Shamadan. Not with helmets. I got to see a variety show set up in the way that the Egyptians would like a variety show. So you would have acrobats, and I do recall this act called Pretty Girl Diane and the Camel, and it was a female acrobat and two men in a camel outfit, and she did acrobatics and a little bit of dancing on top of the camel. The Gwazi were quite impressive, however, balancing those tables in their teeth that said Sahara City on them. And I'll never forget the first time that I saw Soher Zaki at a club I think it was in Zamalek, called the Versailles Palace. And I had only seen her on video, so I was a little, I was familiar with her style, more or less, but you cannot tell on video how much joy that woman radiates from her body when she's dancing. I mean, she comes out and it's like the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. It was just like pure joy watching her. Also, I saw Nazla Al-Adal or Nazla Al-Awalim, however you like to categorize her. I know she uses both names, and she is one of the sort of last of the Muhammad Ali Street dancers who balanced shamadans. And I think she was about 69 when I saw her, and she still dropped straight down into the splits with the shamadan on her head, not on a helmet. That was pretty amazing. I saw Fifi Abdu do her Awalim piece. I saw Nagwa Fuad do her imitation of Turkish dancers in the Turkish brothels, which was pretty interesting. And there's just so many things. would take up the entire time telling you all the really fascinating and eye-opening things that I saw the first few times I was there. And I do recall when I started taking people with me with Ali from Turquoise Finger Cymbals, that a lot of the American dancers weren't recognizing the Egyptian technique because it was a little bit subtle for them. And we would finish these fantastic, amazing shows where these dancers were just incredible. And they would say things like, but they didn't do anything. Be like, really, you didn't see that? But, you know, your eyes have to get used to it, and your ears have to get used to, you have to train them to see the style and to hear the music.
So I know that, you mentioned that Ra'ya Hassam is a great influence and has been a great influence on you and your teaching. And I know you teach some of her signature steps, like the jewel step, and there are others too. And I do believe, it's neat to hear you talk about this subtlety, because you do have great subtlety, but you also have great power, and you transmit great emotion. So I would ask you, now that you've been teaching since you founded your school in 1978, so it's like 41 years ago, you've been teaching and teaching and teaching. It's a good couple of generations there.
It's a good long time, yes.
And you're going strong, and your school is like a regional institution, really. What would you say is your greatest joy in teaching? And what, when you are teaching your classes, what keeps you going and keeps you teaching and connecting with students?
Well, I do enjoy watching dancers get it. Like when the movement finally connects into their body and the energy is flowing through the body without being stopped in some way. I really enjoy watching people get it like that. And then I also enjoy watching them develop as themselves, as their own dancer, as it were, so that they learn the movements and they learn the style, but they're not copying, and they're not just doing a recital for us when they're dancing. They're actually embodying the music in the way that they hear it. And that is probably my greatest joy, when I see someone that, that has taken all of that and is able to translate it through her own body. That is probably my greatest joy. And I also enjoy kind of having a farm team here. It's kind of like the farm team for Jawahir, so people have good technique when they get into the company.
Yes. So that brings me to Jawahir. So 30 years ago, in 1989, you founded Jawahir Dance Company, which means jewels. And as you say, you have this cadre of fantastic dancers, many of whom you trained. And soon thereafter, you started directing and producing these elaborate dance theater productions with live musicians, costuming, group choreographies, and important cultural themes. And you really brought music and dance and culture of the Middle East to the Twin Cities in the Upper Midwest. These shows, I've seen several of them. I've been honored to be involved in some of them, and it's just
my favorite.
It's astounding to look at your body of work, these incredible shows, and I would just be interested if you could talk about some of your favorites and why, because each one was like the year of what, in my view, it was what Cassandra was thinking about this year and what she was interested in. And, that's what you do with these shows. So just what do you think of when you think of your favorite moments over the years?
Well, you pretty much have that right. Every time I did a different show, it was something I was thinking about, or it was a discussion that I had with someone, or a trip that I had that would inspire me to do something. Of course, Shoma is one of my favorites. We've done that twice, and I liked both times that we did it, and that was your, authorship there. I can't really say which one was, I don't have a real favorite, because it's sort of like children, you like them, you love them all, right? We've done shows on the theme of Kulthum twice, and of course those were great moments. And right now, the first one is in my mind a lot, because we had, the great accordion player, vocalist, Ilyas Lamam, who just passed away, sang all of the Kulthum music in that show, and it was quite It was fabulous. And
Oh,
so
yeah, so
I'd be
sad.
missing
Rest in
him
peace. So
seriously.
sad.
Yes. Yeah. And we did, I did love the time that we did Rex Nouveau, which was all newer music from Lebanon with Sharbil Rouhana's music and some other more modern composers. The time that I had Simon Shaheen here and Bassam Saba and Simon's brother Najib for Raxel Jamal. The times that I've collaborated with Hind on Hidden Pearl, when she attached me through fabric to all the walls and I started dancing on the floor with fabric attached to every part of my body and all the walls of the theater. Or when we came out of the back wall, she painted this fantastic backdrop and gave us these cream colored abayas that she made match the backdrop, and we started dancing against the backdrop and came out of the backdrop and people didn't even see it until we started to move away from the backdrop. It was incredible. So there's just been really a lot of moments. It's hard to really pick one particular moment at all. There's just been, I think everything had its moments and I've really enjoyed them all. I've had amazing guest artists from America, from Lebanon, from Egypt. I had a Finnish dancer come in one time. It's been quite the journey, really.
Well, you do beautiful work, and it's been an adventure for your company and for the audiences, a real treat. I hope they appreciate how incredible you are and your work. But I wanted to move along, although we could talk about Jawahir's productions for a whole hour at least. I mean, it's just been so fantastic. One thing I'm really interested in is these days, it seems that the sort of so-called belly dance, Middle Eastern dance, Sharqi world has gone off in many, many different directions. But I suspect in your classes, particularly your advanced level classes, you have people attending who come from all those worlds, correct? And how do you integrate them, and what do you give them and keeps them coming back?
I have to say I don't have that many of them because the people that branch off into those other branches, tribal fusion, ATS, etc., those forms are attractive to them for the reason that they're attractive to them. There's a lot of different reasons that people seek them out. Oftentimes it's a lot of work to learn how to listen to Arabic music with kind of like what I would think of as a kind of a native ear, and interpret it in a way that if someone from that community was watching you, they would know that you understood the music or that you felt the music. And that's quite a long process, and I don't think a lot of people are interested in going through it. And so I use Arabic music in my classes all the time. So if I would say I have a very few people, and most of them are American tribal style, the Carolina Mauricio, that chance belly dance types, because their dancing is a little closer to what we do. But even then, because of the Egyptian technique, not a lot of people that are in those other styles are that interested in learning it. So I really don't have that many of them. Those styles are really like little bubbles all unto themselves, and they really do not cross over that much.
Okay, well, thank you for setting me straight on that. And but I think
I will say the ones that I do have come from a different style and are now interested in exploring like the more culturally authentic styles. I mean, they've generally left those styles and are seeking something that's closer to either they've traveled in the Middle East and they've seen it, or they've been to a wedding, or somehow they had exposure to the culture, like women dancing in the culture and seeing how the women dance themselves, and they became interested in exploring that. If they're committed to the other style, I don't see them that much.
I see. Very good. That's great. So let's talk about your journey as a percussionist. So I remember when I was studying beginning finger cymbals from you way back in the day, you said that you used to drive a taxi and you would practice playing finger cymbals while waiting in the cab line with your zills on. Is that true?
That is true. When I was in college, one of the ways I put myself through school was to drive a taxi. And in those days, you would spend a lot of time, there's no cell phones or anything, you had to wait in line. You'd spend a lot of time at the airport waiting in line. Sometimes you'd be there a couple of hours or an hour or so waiting. And so I would just roll up all the windows, put my cymbals on and play so that I could listen to myself play. Otherwise, there isn't really much to do unless you're going to read. Some of the taxi drivers, of course, played cards. But I would just practice there. And that was not my introduction to that, but I guess it was it was the beginning of me learning how to play, and that was when I was still in Minnesota. So when I went to San Francisco, I already did know how to play a little bit. So all of the cymbal patterns that Aida helped Jamila come up with were challenging, but not completely new to me.
That's wonderful. And so you learned from musicians where you were performing in the clubs? Is that how you began learning the actual how to rick technique and tabla technique?
Yeah, they would show us, if you were interested, not all the dancers were interested in this, but I was interested in it. An extra percussionist in a small band, I mean, a lot of times there were only 3 or 4 pieces in the club. And an extra percussionist was always useful. So if you wanted to, they would show you they would just hand you the rick and kind of gesture like this is what you do and nod their head when you got it right. So you were kind of learning on the job, but it was sort of trial by fire. But they would just teach you the rhythms and more or less like where the major accents were. I think my really good introduction to technique was with Michel Merhige, of course, at the Arabic Music Retreat, where I always wanted to know how to play classical technique, where you played on the rim and you got that great wood sound. And he showed me a lot. So I really evaluate that he's the most amazing Rick player I've ever seen in my life anyway. It's like, looks like his hands don't even touch the instrument, and yet there's all this sound.
Yes, you were at the very first Arabic Music Retreat in 1997, part of that pioneering group. You are extremely musical. I mean, that's one reason we became friends back in the 70s, is because I love Arabic music as well. And you were like the only person around that enjoyed dance and Middle Eastern music. So I remember we used to talk about it for hours and hours because it was like we felt, hardly anyone else got it. But you continued your musical journey. Your own musical journey has far surpassed mine in its own way, and as a percussionist, you've really developed. And now you're playing drum sets. You should talk a little bit about that, which is quite.
Yes. A few years ago, occasionally I'm on an arts panel here. We have a Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, and they use artists and other people from the community to sit on a panel where we read grants and evaluate grants for funding. And I was on a panel, and there was a grant that was for an organization called She Rock, and it was about the women's rock and roll retreat that they had over the weekend, where you could show up and they'd teach you to play whatever it was that you wanted to play, and you would compose 2 songs and perform them before the end of the weekend. And I was thinking to myself, boy, that really sounds like fun, So, Mike, my longtime partner, was a professional drum kit player. I mean, he plays all styles, and he was a jazz player for many, many years. So I asked him to start teaching me. He couldn't believe I really wanted to learn, but I started there, and I've just continued taking lessons and working on my own and learning on my own and practicing whatever I can, and I'm still playing. So I just finished a band that I was with that we played all James Bond themes, and now I'm in an Elvis band. So,
wow, that is wonderful! Oh, what a blast! That's great.
Right. And of course, I still play Rick with the local musicians Amwaj and Dahola and whatever Tim O'Keefe needs me to play backup for, and he's threatening to let me bring my drum kit in sometime when he needs it. So that would be fun.
Wow, that's fantastic. Oh, that's great.
Well, like the second thing I did when I got behind the drum kit was figure out how to play all the Arabic rhythms. So the first thing was figure out how to play it all.
Can you play the Samai 10/8 rhythm on a drum kit?
I can.
Boy.
Yeah, I tried them all. I tried them all. Some of them were quite challenging, and the Samai was a little bit challenging, but I can play it on the kit now.
Boy, I would love to hear that sometime. That'd be good.
I'll send you a clip. Because none of, whenever I'm doing whenever I'm in the rock band, and the biggest thing about the issue about that is, of course, I have this big black hole of American Western music that when I was never listening to American music for years and years and years, like 30 years, 35 years of like blackout of American music. So people go, oh, that song. Well, of course I don't know it. I have to learn everything from the beginning a lot of times. And sometimes they'll say, oh, well, let's play some of your music. I'm like, I don't think you could do that. You'd have to sing in Arabic. You don't know the makamat. This would be a problem. Right.
Oh, that is, yeah. I mean, aside from Miserlou, right? Oh, wow. That
right.
is hysterical.
Right.
Oh, that's great.
Aside from Miserlou. Yeah, they've all heard Dick Dale's Miserlou. That's true. Right.
That's about it, I'm sure.
That's about it.
We're doing well here. Go ahead.
I have to tell you this. I once had when I was back here. We have a local bar called Nye's Polonaise Room. It was owned by a Polish guy, as you can tell by Polonaise, and his birthday was February 14th. And his son, he loved Oriental dancers. He loved belly dancing. He really loved it. So they would hire a dancer for his birthday, and I think I danced at his birthday about 6 times. And he owned this bar, and they had a polka band, and every year I had to dance with the polka band. And I didn't know what to tell them to play because it's a polka band. But I remembered from ages ago reading Serena's book saying, if you happen to have to dance with an American band, ask them to play Caravan. They almost all know it. So I thought, oh yeah, Caravan. So they did. They played me a polka version of Caravan. I played cymbals and danced. It was quite hilarious.
Wow. Now that's when I wish we had an early version of YouTube up there. Oh, well.
Right. No, I don't think we want to see that.
Oh, that's great stuff. But before we go here, this has been so delightful. I wanted you to talk a little bit about your technique intensive class that you teach every Saturday and that you're going to be teaching here in Maine in June. What is that class all about, and what's its goal?
So that is my favorite class of the week, and I think I've been doing it for a little, maybe 20 years now. I think about approximately every Saturday that I'm in town, I teach that class. And my goal for that is to keep people practicing all the techniques that they've learned so that they become second nature in the body, so that they're really dancing with them and they're not just doing a step. So we go through, more or less, I have a plan in my head every time I approach the class. We do a warm-up, and then we start with certain techniques, and then we add complexity as we go along. And then that way, the different level students that are in the class can perform at the level that they can perform at. And they can challenge themselves, but they can perform and practice where they have control. And my goal is to improve everyone's technique and to make it more like dance and less like having to recite a step, so that when they're dancing and not doing a recital. So I go through different weeks, I go through different kinds of techniques. Sometimes I will just focus on a step pattern and do however many different kinds of body movements you could do with that, or directional changes you could do with that. And sometimes it's just focusing on a particular technique for a little while. I usually have 3 or 4 things that I end up putting into combination. I'll do the technique and then we'll do a combination with it, and I'll switch the combination around so that everybody's doing it. We do it on both sides to make sure everyone's flexible from right to left, and just to challenge everyone, and including myself, just to keep our chops nice and sharp.
Oh, that sounds great, and I'm so much looking forward to you coming to Maine and sharing this class and the other classes that we've got planned for you here. So, but I thank you so much for spending some time with me and your listening audience, and I hope that this your success continues with Jawahir and the Cassandra School. And it's so wonderful to learn more about your dance journey. And I have so many more questions. We could just keep talking about this for days. But thank you so much for being with us, Cassandra.
Well, thank you, Kay, for having me. And if people are coming to the technique intensive, they do need to be prepared to move.
I love it how you say minimum talk, maximum dance. So
Absolutely.
looking forward to that. Anyway,
All right, thank you.
thank